was celebrity in the field of wildlife conservation, and we are very, very privileged and honored to have him today amongst us. I also want to, at this stage, thank my colleague from the Forest Department, especially Mr. Vinay Sacheti. He had suggested that we get Dr. Karanth, and his student, Dr. Reddy, perhaps got in touch with him. Dr. Karanth has just had cataract surgery, but he was kind enough to agree to our request to speak to us today. So that's very kind of you, sir. Also, welcome to all our friends. Just a word about Jigyasa. It's a forum of All India Services pensioners, 3 services, Forest Service, Administrative Service, and the Police Service. But it's an open forum. We invite all people who are interested in this subject, and they often join us. Initially, this was set up with some scholars from the university and some of the members of our association. It ran for several years, very informally, but they did manage to organize some 150 lectures. And after the demise of one of these founders, we took it over in our association. And we've organized so far some 45 lectures. These range from climate change to future of globalization to Adi Shankaracharya to Duryodhan to Hindi film music, all kinds of issues which might be of interest. And today we are having this discussion on tiger, particularly conservation. Of course, tiger is extremely important from the point of view of environment. It's our national animal. Some estimates say that we have something like 3,000 tigers in India, but of course, Dr. Karanth would perhaps give us a more accurate figure. It's been voted the most popular animal in the world by a survey done by Animal Planet, the cable news network on animals and forests. So according to them, this is the most popular animal. Dog, which is a very favorite animal of mankind, comes second after tiger. Tiger has had considerable importance in our mythology, in our folklore, but of course we all know about it, and I won't take any more time on it. And I will now request Mr. Umesh Sahay to kindly introduce Dr. Karanth. Unfortunately, our president, Mr. Arun Kumar, who's traveling, he's also not well. So he's asked to be excused from this meeting. Perhaps he might join if he feels better. But in his place, I've requested Mr. Umesh Sahay, who's also one of our colleagues, vice president of our association, and a former principal conservator of, chief conservator of forests. So I requested him to kindly introduce Dr. Karanth. Sahay Saab, kindly.
नमस्कार, नमस्कार. Am I audible to you?
Yes.
मेरी आवाज आ रही है आप सबके पास में?
Yes, yes, yes. You are very much audible.
सर्वप्रथम मैं अपनी तरफ से और ऑल इंडिया सर्विस पेंशनर्स एसोसिएशन के सभी सदस्यों की तरफ से आज के वार्ताकार और वन्यजीव विशेषज्ञ खासतौर से टाइगर स्पेशलिस्ट डॉक्टर उल्लास कारंथ जी का हार्दिक स्वागत। A glass half empty or half full. वैसे तो डॉक्टर कारंथ किसी परिचय या किसी इंट्रोडक्शन के मोहताज नहीं है। वन और वन्य जीव संरक्षण से जुड़े हुए जितने भी मेंबर्स हैं, जितने भी सदस्य हैं जो इस दिशा में काम कर रहे हैं, वो सभी उनके नाम से, उनके काम से भली भांति परिचित हैं। फिर भी रस्म अदायगी के रूप में कुछ बातें कारंथ जी के बारे में बताना चाहूंगा। आपका जन्म 1948 में कर्नाटका के पुत्तूर जिले में हुआ था। आपके फादर शिवराम जी एक नोटेड कन्नड़ राइटर रहे हैं। डॉक्टर उल्लास कारंथ अपनी किशोरावस्था में ही इनकी रुचि वन और पर्यावरण से हो गई थी और उससे संबंधित आलेख, टाइगर कंजर्वेशन संबंधित आलेख आप देखा करते थे, पढ़ा करते थे। आपने 1971 में सूरतकल एनआईटी के इंस्टीट्यूट से आईआईटी मैकेनिकल इंजीनियरिंग में किया है और 1983 में एक स्मिथसोनियन इंस्टीट्यूशन के डेलीगेशन वहां आया था, उससे आपकी मीटिंग हुई और उसके बाद आपका मार्ग फॉरेन जाकर वाइल्ड लाइफ से कंसर्न स्टडीज करने के लिए प्रशस्त हुआ। बीच में कुछ कम ही लोग जानते होंगे कि आपने फार्मिंग में भी अपना हाथ आजमाया, कुछ दिन शायद खेती भी की है, अगर कारंथ जी मैं गलत नहीं कह रहा हूं तो। फिर 87 में आप यूएस जाकर नेशनल जूज वाइल्ड लाइफ कंजर्वेशन एंड मैनेजमेंट ट्रेनिंग प्रोग्राम में आपने अध्ययन किया। इस बीच 1984 में आपने सेंटर फॉर वाइल्ड लाइफ स्टडीज का स्टैब्लिश किया और उसके एमेरिटस डायरेक्टर के रूप में अभी तक भी काम कर रहे हैं। 1988 में यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ फ्लोरिडा से मास्टर डिग्री इन वाइल्ड लाइफ इकोलॉजी लिया आपने। वापस 1993 मैंगलोर यूनिवर्सिटी से अप्लाइड जूलॉजी में भी डॉक्टरेट की। दिस शोज कि आपने पहले मैकेनिकल इंजीनियरिंग से किया था लेकिन आपका रुझान उस तरफ था नहीं, तो अल्टीमेटली वाइल्ड लाइफ से रिलेटेड जितनी भी थी वो आपने अध्ययन किया और दिशा में ही अपना रुचि बढ़ाते गए। आपका लॉन्गेस्ट प्रोजेक्ट जो रहा मॉनिटरिंग ऑफ द हेल्थ फॉरेस्ट एंड बायोडाइवर्सिटी नागरहोले वाइल्ड लाइफ सेंचुरी नेशनल पार्क, वहां पे आपने सबसे लंबा प्रोजेक्ट लिया, अध्ययन किया और इस स्टडी के रिजल्ट जो हैं वो काफी साइंटिफिक जर्नल्स में पब्लिश हुए। कैमरा ट्रैपिंग जो आजकल बहुत कॉमन है, इसकी शुरुआत डॉक्टर कारंथ ने की और इससे जो टाइगर एस्टिमेशन होता है वो काफी हद तक एक्यूरेट होता है। इससे पहले जो पग मार्क मेथड से टाइगर सेंसस होता था, उसकी काउंटिंग होती थी, उसमें गलती की और कमी की संभावना बनी रहती थी। गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया की फॉरेस्ट एडवाइजरी कमेटी एनटीसीए के भी सदस्य हैं डॉक्टर कारंथ और कर्नाटका के टाइगर कमिटी कंजर्वेशन फाउंडेशन एंड टाइगर स्टीयरिंग कमेटी के भी आप सदस्य हैं। 2008 में इंडियन एकेडमी ऑफ साइंसेज के आप सदस्य चुने गए। जूलॉजिकल सोसाइटी ऑफ लंदन व IUCN स्पीशीज सर्वाइवल कमीशन स्पेशलिस्ट ग्रुप्स एंड कैट्स, एलिफेंट्स एंड स्मॉल कार्निवोर्स के भी आप सदस्य हैं। एक इंपॉर्टेंट बात यह है कि फेमस राइटर जो R.K. नारायण जी हैं, उन्होंने अपनी बुक ए टाइगर फॉर मालगुडी लिखने के दौरान कारंथ साहब से टाइगर के बिहेवियर और जानकारी के लिए संपर्क किया था। क्यों, सही है मैं कह रहा हूँ या कुछ इसमें गलती है या whatever it is?
He borrowed my books, yes.
अच्छा वो मैंने कहीं मैंने पढ़ा था इसलिए मैंने बताया। आपको जो बुक्स और पब्लिकेशन हैं वो काफी हैं, 100 से ज्यादा आपने आर्टिकल साइंटिफिक पेपर्स पब्लिश किए हैं जो महत्वपूर्ण साइंटिफिक जर्नल से पब्लिश हुए हैं। 50 से अधिक पॉपुलर आर्टिकल्स इंग्लिश और कन्नड़ लैंग्वेज में लिखे हैं। आपके द्वारा लिखी हुई जो दो बुक्स हैं, फर्स्ट द वे ऑफ द टाइगर 2001 में लिखी गई और दूसरा ए व्यू फ्रॉम द मचान 2006 में, हाउ साइंस कैन सेव द फ्रेजाइल प्रेडेटर। फिर आपने 2 बुक को एडिट भी की हैं, मॉनिटरिंग टाइगर्स एंड देयर प्रे, कैमरा ट्रैप्स इन एनिमल इकोलॉजी। डॉक्टर कारंथ इज हाईली डेकोरेटेड पर्सन। आपको समय समय पर विभिन्न अवार्ड से नवाजा गया है, बहुत अवार्ड आपको मिले हैं, सम्मानित किया गया है। 2006 में आपको सियरा क्लब इंटरनेशनल अर्थ केयर अवार्ड मिला। वर्ष 2007 में ही वॉन द जे पॉल गेटी अवार्ड फॉर कंजर्वेशन लीडरशिप और 2007 में ही सेंचुरी एशिया का लाइफ टाइम अचीवमेंट अवार्ड से आपको सम्मानित किया गया। 2010 में कर्नाटका गवर्नमेंट ने राज्योत्सव अवार्ड दिया और सबसे जो बड़ा अवार्ड मैं समझता हूँ 2012 में प्रेस्टिजियस पद्मश्री अवार्ड वाइल्ड लाइफ कंजर्वेशन एंड एनवायरमेंटल प्रोटेक्शन के लिए आपको दिया गया। 2019 में जॉर्ज शेलर लाइफ टाइम अवार्ड इन वाइल्ड लाइफ कंजर्वेशन साइंस फ्रॉम द वाइल्ड लाइफ कंजर्वेशन सोसाइटी भी आपको मिला। एक बात मैं गूगल में सर्च नहीं कर पाया कि डॉक्टर कारंथ ने अपनी आजादी कब खोई। I mean, when he got married, कब आपकी शादी हुई है, मैं साल नहीं पता कर पाया. तो डॉक्टर नहीं, प्रतिभा जी से आपकी शादी हुई, और प्रतिभा जी भी अपने में अलग शख्सियत हैं. उनका जो बायोडाटा है वो भी अचीवमेंट से और अवार्ड से भरा पड़ा है. शी इज स्पीच एंड लैंग्वेज पैथोलॉजिस्ट. आपकी जो डॉटर है वो एक कृति कारंथ, एन अमेरिकन alumni of American universities of Yale, Duke and Florida. Am I right, Karanth sir? And now she is chief conservation scientist at the Center of Wildlife Studies, जो आपने 1984 में इस्टेब्लिश किया था. तो मैं बहुत ज्यादा समय आप लोगों का नहीं लूंगा. आप सब लोग डॉक्टर कारंथ को सुनने के लिए बेचैन होंगे, उत्सुक होंगे. तो मैं नाउ ओवर टू उल्लास कारंथ जी. थैंक यू.
It's a pleasure for me to address this gathering, and particularly because wildlife conservation is a field. There are many fields, the stock market and various other fields, where you can prosper, you can thrive, you can make a difference on the ground without involving the government. In India, that is impossible in my field, because almost all the wildlife that survives now survives on government land. So unless you are a lab biologist or want to escape from the field, there is no way you can do either research or conservation without engaging in the government. So my career has involved intimately working with government. The experience is not always present, but the fact is I have engaged with the government very seriously, particularly in the area of conservation, and particularly with the forest department, then to a lesser degree police and administrative services. And one of the things, it's kind of all of you are very occupied very senior positions. What I have seen in the government, by and large, is that there's a tremendous amount of good work being done, but there's a small fraction of the people in the system are actually delivering that good work. And if you look at the broader phenomena, probably the work done doesn't rise to the level of efficiency you see outside the government, because there are also a lot of people who are there who are not doing much. So the burden, so when you're an outsider looking at the system, the burden on those good people who have to face the kind of pressures, kind of incredible confrontations they face with the other parts of the society. I know from my experience whether people like Reddy and what they have gone through in life. So I appreciate it, because I'm bringing this out because of officials, there's a feeling that I criticize the government too much. So in my talk, I'll explain why, but that is I'm not an ivory tower academic. There are a lot of academics criticizing the government who never are on ground or see the tensions or pressures that good officials face on ground. So I'm not talking from that perspective. So my criticisms are meant for improving things, because I don't think any system is perfect. It constantly needs to improve. And the science, the field of science itself, is basically meant for criticizing. Anybody comes up with a new idea, all the other scientists jump on him like those jump on a deer and criticize him. That is how science progresses. So it's kind of scientific training. It's not meant to denigrate the government. I just wanted to clarify this. And without further ado, what I would like to do is to go through a PowerPoint presentation, which is much more interesting than me just talking. And once that is done, I will come back on the screen maybe towards the end for Q&A. So it's about 15 minutes into my talk. Put the PowerPoint on so you can see it, and I'll be talking in the background. Is it visible now on the screen?
Please share your screen, sir, first.
Okay, 1 minute. I thought I had done that. Let me see. Zoom, okay. Let's see. Share screen, okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let me see how I took that. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir.
The screen is visible?
Yes, sir.
Something blocking the screen or it's visible fully? Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. So the talk is titled 50 Years of Tiger Conservation, a glass half full or half empty. And in about 30 to 40 minutes, I'll try to compress my 50 years of engagement with wildlife in different stages of my life. But before getting into that, we Indians are very proud of our culture, our ancient temples, our religion and rituals. But most of us don't even recognize how fortunate we are for reasons we had nothing to do with us. This is because of our position on the globe, movement of continental plates. 68 million years ago, India broke off and bumped into the main Asian continent. Of reasons of that kind, we have incredible biodiversity in India, because people have said, we have to save biodiversity, it's critical. Everybody agrees, every country agrees the global mandate is for conservation. And although India occupies only little over 2% of the world's surface, we have 13% of the world's birds, 7% of the world's mammals. And particularly when you come to tiger, these are large carnivores. The large carnivorous species, of all the carnivorous species in the world, on 2% of the world's surface, we have 24% of the world's carnivore species, including the lion, leopard, and the tiger. So it's an incredible riches that we have inherited. So I think we should look at it a little bit as something we have to save for next generation also. So I think there's a moral obligation to conservation. And this is not just in terms of the species diversity, it is kind of species that are represented. Species evolved over different parts of the globe and then spread across. And if you look at these major faunal realms, Africa is one. And for example, the species we have, like the striped hyena, the leopard, and the lion, which are originated from the tropical African context. We, of course, have typical Asian species like the rhinoceros and the tiger and the dhole, but we also have species that are found in North America and Europe and Central Asia. We have grizzly bears in India, brown bears. We have red deer or elk, which is the Kashmir stag or hangul. We have the red fox, which is found throughout the globe. It's the mammal with the widest distribution in the globe. So it is this incredible riches that we are trying to capture when we say save the tiger or save something else. And this diversity of birds, amphibians, there's a variety of diversity. And underneath that is the land and the forest. I'll be talking primarily about terrestrial biodiversity, not about marine. Also provides a stable resource-based ecosystem services for both agriculture and modern society. So it's not just about saving the tiger, it's about saving all this when we talk about tiger conservation. And the other thing is, people talk about reviving the mammoth or genetically creating a species that is lost. That's all fine. But in reality, if we have to save the species diversity we have now, it has to be done in situ. It has to be done in the place, but because there are linkages like frugivory, food chains, all these linkages have to be maintained in situ. You cannot do it in a lab. So while lab biodiversity, bioinformatics can help, saving nature, saving wildlife has to be on ground. There is no other place you can save it. And this means saving vast tracts of land. It means saving a substantial amount of land, and that is where the problem comes. Because we are also large mammals, and our numbers have now hit 8 billion, and we are going to hit 10 billion before we start plateauing. India has now become the most populous nations. So all this means is that we are a competing species. While we may claim affinity, love for animals, we do compete, and we have to view this competition seriously and solve problems rather than make an assumption that because we care for animals, they get saved. They don't. Just to give a very brief comparison, India is 1/3 the size of US, but we have 4 times as many people. And till recently, about 60% of the people were rural, 60% used wood as energy. More or less, we are transitioning away from that. More about that later. But this was typically the situation when we began tiger conservation in 1970s and late 60s. Since then, of course, the economy has grown and much has changed, as I will cover in my talk. But we have an economy now growing at 6 to 9% per year, superimposed on these rural biomass requirements. So what, as a consequence, natural forests have shrunk to about 10. Legal area may be a little more, but if you look at reasonably intact natural forests, is perhaps 10%. And if you look at wildlife protected areas, it's about 4.5. It's so de facto, perhaps it may be even 6. And if you look at effective protection, where everything is in place, we are talking about only 1% or 2%. I'm stressing this point because often people say we are a poor country, we are a developing country. Can we save land for wildlife? We are not making a big demand here. When conservationists say, push this figure up to 3% to 10%, push this effective protection up to 5%, it's not an unreasonable demand, given that we have 90 to 95% of the land for meeting developmental needs. It is how intelligently you need to do this combination is the issue. I don't think a moral or even an economic argument can be made that by destroying this remaining 3 or 4 or 5%, you're going to improve human welfare radically. Very unlikely. So this is a picture showing the forest cover of India. And as you notice, except in the Rajasthan desert and in the Himalayas, most of it was forest. Now on the right, you the fragmentation. And what you see on the left is my bottom is my old, my study area of Karnataka, Malenad. Nagarhole is at the bottom there, the protected areas in dark shade. And even the right figure, right bottom figure, a single tiger reserve, Kali Tiger Reserve, the red dots show human enclaves. So people are everywhere. We do not have vast expanses of spaces like they have in Canada, in North America, or Namibia, or South Africa, or all these places. We have to manage in a very small, crowded subcontinent and very small parks. And so what quickly, I think the forest officers here know what I'm going to talk about. Since the audience is a broader one, I'm just saying the single biggest threat to wildlife continues to be hunting. People may say it's come down here and there, but overall, if you look at it, vast parts of Indian forests are empty because people are hunting. There are two drivers to this hunting. One is wherever poverty and agriculture or animal husbandry have not developed sufficiently, protein deficiency is the biggest driver of local hunting. This is true of Africa, this is true of Nagaland, this is true of Arunachal Pradesh, this is true of Laos. So this is a driver. Just because we see few tigers in a few parks, we cannot say this protein subsistence hunting has vanished. It still continues to be a threat, but it has also changed dramatically in some landscapes, particularly in the Western Ghats, some parts of parts of Uttarakhand, it has declined dramatically because of protection, new laws, etc. And in some parts like Rajasthan and Gujarat, it's probably not such a major driver because a large proportion of the people don't hunt for protein, although there are hunting communities. So this is a threat we must recognize. It's not a solved problem as some people pretend. Then there is commercial wildlife trade. Here's a picture of a tiger, but this now affects every species, particularly pangolins, which are a widespread benevolent species for us, termite-eating animals, and they're being killed by the truckloads and transported and exported, driven by a global trade on which we have very little control. Then there are two kinds of pressures that come on the remaining wildlife habitats. Most of it is converted to agriculture. What remains now as forest also has these pressures, and they come from two sectors. One is the rural sector, the village populations that encroach into forests, remove biomass, promote grasslands by burning the forest, and harvest a wide variety of NTFP products. Now, the problem is a lot of people who plead for intimate mixture of people and forests and people living in harmony, they refuse to look at these pressures. They say, oh, people will take care of things. We don't have to do anything, which is simply not true. So what they do is they point at the damage done by the industrial sector, the transportation sector, the mining sector, and say, that's the reason why the forest is vanishing. There are no problems with people using the land, which is simply not true. The other thing that is forgotten in this debate is these rural uses were extremely limited and for home consumption. Now they are linked to urban markets. Urban market in India is 400 million, whether it is amla or this is a Garcinia that is exported worldwide for obesity reduction. So the very resource is being over-harvested and disappearing. So just because the agent exploiting it or harvesting it is a poor person, it doesn't mean it has no impact for wildlife. On the other hand, in the process of industrializing, developing, becoming self-sufficient in food, we have submerged enormous areas under reservoirs. This is an example of this massive irrigation schemes, hydropower schemes, which have hugely impacted wildlife. Although the overall area may not be as much as agriculture, but it's quite substantial. Mining is another industrial problem which has affected very large areas. And the industries that promote these, the transportation, mining, simply do not recognize the damage they are doing. Or, for example, the transportation boom, we have only 4% of the land under protected areas. There are solutions of going above, going under, going over, going around that are possible. They're technically more expensive, but we don't use them. And we cut through the last remaining areas while expanding our highway systems. And this is going to be a serious problem. So the promoters of village use point at these and say the problem is not with us, with others. Then there are a couple of areas that have emerged in the last 20 or 30 years, which everybody thinks is a good idea. And this is another problem. Now, with the global warming emerging as a major issue, the issue of energy and electrification and clean energy has assumed a lot of importance. And the solution is pushed in the form of microhydel projects, wind power, and particularly in Rajasthan and Gujarat, solar power. Now, are these green power generation projects really green if your intent is to save that 5 or 10% under nature? No, in my opinion, they are causing far more harm, and we are not even recognize it. While I was on the Forest Advisory Committee, it came to my notice, Mr. Dilip Kumar, a good friend of mine, was DG at that time. It came to our notice that these kind of projects had needed no clearance, environmental clearance, because they were considered benevolent. But the damage from wind power to birds, now it's documented to bird populations, microhydels that are penetrating the remotest parts of Himachal and Northeast India and Western Ghats. the damage these are causing is enormous, and we have just begun to document them. The general public still thinks this is we are deploying them, they are killing off the last wildlife habitats. So that's just by way of a bit of a background, because I don't want to give a narrow talk on the tiger, but I will fit the tiger in now. The tiger was once found in 30 different countries, but in the last 200 years, the tiger's range has shrunk by 93%. It occupies 7% of its former distribution, which was from Armenia to Bali, from Iraq to Vladivostok. It's gone. It's there on 7% in fragmented areas. So it's not that tigers are doing well at all. But one of the things about the Indian tiger conservation approach, which was really Mrs. Indira Gandhi has to be complimented, and the conservationists of that generation who influenced her, Peter Jackson, Billy Arjun Singh, many others, Diluit Matai, these were the people who pushed for a species-based approach, because when you use these charismatic species, like the tiger, you are able to encompass a lot of other things, as I pointed out. And also, when you have a species that vibes with the psyche of the society, you get social impact. Whether it's the bureaucracy, whether it's the citizens, with a charismatic species which has cultural and religious connections, the impact is huge. This is one of the reasons why, because of our Hindu culture and its at a deeper level reverence or tolerance of nature, admiration for tiger as a god, whatever, that's why the people, in fact, were willing to tolerate the idea, despite their poverty, these animals also needed some space. This is unique to India. You don't find it even in Buddhist countries like Laos or Cambodia. They've eaten everything away. So this is a solid foundation on which we can build modern conservation. I'm not saying it alone can do it, but we can. And this fascination continues as the country becomes, country has a 300 million strong middle class. There's urban affluence. There are people willing to pay 100,000 rupees a night to spend in a safari lodge. This is another new power that is coming for the future for us. We have to view this fascination for the tiger as a positive for conservation rather than just ignore it. Sorry. So my interest in tigers began as a child, as the introduction pointed out, but it really took a focus when I was in second year engineering in NITK Surathkal. And I read an article by Dr. George Schaller in Life magazine. This was in 1966. And I didn't like engineering. I got in because I needed a training and a job. But I actually hated engineering, and I used to bunk classes and go to Nagarhole and Kudremukh and all these places. This opened the door to me saying, at some point, this is what I want to do. Study tigers and other wildlife and grow a career around that. I was only 19 years old. It took me 15 more years to actually do it. But that's what opened my eyes, how science can actually make you understand animals and have their conservation. And the key point of Schaller's study or ecology was that the prey holds the key. It is really not even today in North America or even in India, the importance of prey is not recognized. We say we assess prey, etc. But the fundamental biology that a tiger requires 1 cheetal or something like that a week, and to provide that, it needs a bank account of 500 cheetal to draw that interest. And this huge requirement of prey has to be foundational before you can build tiger or cheetah or any species. You have to have a vast prey base and a large area before you can even think of a predator. So I started with Schaller's focus, and at some point in life, in 1983, I met Mel Sundquist, who did the first radio telemetry study of tigers in Nepal. He took me on a student in Florida, And at that time, Dr. George Schaller came to Florida, and then as I graduated, he hired me to work in India for WCS, and I was able to realize my dream. So I started my work in 1986 in Nagarhole, and it was very clear to me the prey was the first priority. So I applied systematic land transect sampling that was never done in, and over years monitored this large prey species populations very systematically and rigorously in Nagarhole. And this is just a summary of the data. This is the number of prey per square kilometer. Some of these parks have 40, 50 prey animals per square kilometers, Bandipur and Nagarhole. And you can also say in this the effect of protection. Those parks at the peak were protected for 50 years, and they are at that stage now. Whereas those parks in the bottom, they have received less protection. So this whole prey recovery is not overnight. It takes years, decades. So that's where the first effort has to go. If you want a viable carnivore population, the prey base has to be built up. And the prey have to be counted using the right methods. When these studies were done, the tropical ecologies generally felt that the density of prey in tropical forests is low. Africa is where high densities are retained. But my studies showed that our tropical forests, whether it is Kannar, Ranthambore, or Nagarhole, can support prey biomass and density as high as that of East Africa, or perhaps even higher. This was a positive. Given the country's small parks, this was a very positive signal from the science, although nobody took notice. The second step of the effort was to then understand tigers directly. And this is a species that requires a technique called radio-telemetry. There's no way you can study it without telemetry. So I had to begin the first telemetry project. And I must say that at that time, there was a lot of resistance. One of the most admired persons in India, even I admire him, Kailash Sankla, was totally opposed to radio telemetry. Over years, he changed his opinion, but at that time, he was very opposed to radio telemetry. But luckily for me, my cousin Shyam Sundar, who was chief conservator in Karnataka, Dr. Ranjit Singh, who was joint secretary in MOEF, and Mr. Sheshan, who was secretary environment, they were very clear that this science has to be brought in. So I was able to get the permission and begin my telemetry work in Nagarhole, which involved capture and collaring. I won't go into that because there is not the time to go in. But we used a technique that was used in Nepal and Bihar for hunting tigers. We modified it to catch free-ranging tigers. It's a beautiful method. It's still not used widely because most of the darting now happens in either circumstances with tigers that are cornered or tigers which are used to tourists. We had a hard time catching tigers, but it was exciting. And I've written a lot about all this in my book, Among Tigers, which I will talk at the end of my, it just come out. So we put collars on tigers and I started tracking them. And I saw lots of things, although tracking is generally very boring because you don't see the animals. I saw a lot of things and I'll show an example. This is not my video. This is taken by a tourist later, but these are the kinds of incidents that I was able to witness as I entered the world of the tiger. That cow weighed 3 times as much as the tiger. And the tiger is a lethal killing machine designed to kill large mammals. So I show that video particularly to audiences. I know the forest officers here have certainly seen some things like this, but a lot of people think tiger is a cuddly animal that you can hug. People very safe from the tiger attack advocate that the tiger be released where people are, or that the problem be local people live with the tiger. It's not, it's, you see what the situation is. So to me, it's very important that while you love the tiger as a species, when you have a tiger that is operating in a lethal manner on local people, we have to address it very quickly by eliminating that animal. There's no way around it. And the efforts to tranquilize, take, which happens because forest officers are put in a horrible situation. They are under pressure from other people to capture it, release it somewhere, although they know it's not going to work. And then local people want the tiger killed. So this is something we have to be very clear. Saving the species is different from saving every individual tiger. So the study of the tiger predation that I was able to do showed that a single tiger requires 500 prey animals, and it requires these large prey. You cannot have tigers surviving on snails and frogs. And the second thing that was telemetry revealed was how tigers communicated. Because a vast area like Bangalore city may have 6 tigers. How do they even keep in touch without email, phone, whatever? They do it through scent marking. They have a very complicated scent marking system. They can identify each other. Each scent mark is like an Aadhaar card and an email, everything rolled into one. They're able to maintain a society. This communication system, territoriality, all that is possible primarily through scent systems. And I was able to get the first data on home range sizes. I won't again go deep into this data, but there are territorial animals, then there are floaters that are trying to find territories. The territorial tigress there, shown in pink, had a home range of 20 square kilometers. I was blown away because people studying tigers in Russia were finding home ranges of 600 square kilometers. If Nagarhole were in Russia, there could be one female tigress in all of Nagarhole. But because it is in our habitat with rich prey, we can have 20 or 30 female tigers in Nagarhole. This is again good news for tiger conservation, because we can have a lot of tigers in relatively small areas, unlike in the Russian Far East or in areas where the prey has been hunted out completely. So this is where I make the argument that there is a lot more room for tigers in India, because these kind of small territories and high densities are in very small fraction of our tiger habitat. Most of it is not in this condition, and so there's a lot of scope for bringing back tigers. So as I was finishing my telemetry study, I ran into a lot of problems. It was stopped multiple times. I had to go to court and fight back and get in. And of course, Mr. Dhirendra Singh knows all about it. He was in that position towards the end of my fight. Anyway, another threat struck tigers. This was the Chinese economy's resurgence, which led to a demand for tiger body parts. Even in parks like Ranthambore and Thana, fringes of Nagarhole, tiger poachers came and knocked out the tigers. And this was very quick. And Mr. Fateh Singh Rathore and Valmik Thapar really took up this issue, and people like G.V. Reddy were on the ground dealing with it. So it became clear to me that this was more priority than studying tiger behavior. But unfortunately, as in the introduction, Mr. Sahai had mentioned that there was a method called the Pugmark method. I had critiqued it right from 90s that it didn't work, but they were still continuing with it, and that thing was masking the issue of this tiger decline and things. So I had critiqued the Pugmark census. I had shown it didn't work, but I felt as a scientist I had a responsibility to show what else can be done. And that is how I started experimenting with camera traps in 1990. And there are two things here that I must bring very quickly. There are two aspects to it. One was deploying camera traps to identify individual, but even more important was to use the correct statistical models, capture, recapture, all these advanced analysis. But I'm very surprised, and this is where I have some reservations about the bureaucratic management of science in India. Even when I published this paper in 1995, said this won't work. Until 2005, they would not even look at the method. And even after 2005, when they took over the camera trapping part of it, even after that, even after 20 years, they're still not using the right models, the right approaches statistically. So you're using traps, but you're not getting accurate results because you're not using the traps right. So I started camera trapping, identifying tigers and giving them numbers. And one thing that we published in a very good journal, it became very clear that the abundance of prey and tigers were strongly prey related, driven by prey density. You had to push prey density up to really get tiger numbers up. And at that time, I had techniques for counting both, and I wanted to do the same stuff I was doing in Karnataka across India. Unfortunately, I did not get permission from Project Tiger or the Ministry of Environment. Then I met Mr. Kamal Nath. He was a very dynamic minister, and he just called for the file and cleared it. So I was able to do this study, which was published later in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, which clearly showed the relationship between tiger and prey, where the prey density is low. In some places, the tiger densities are high because tigers are eating livestock also. In some places, tiger densities are high, but prey densities don't match because the tiger poaching was very heavy, so the tiger numbers were being brought down by direct hunting. A lot of insights into situations can be gained if you get good data. Some of the trapping data also showed long distance dispersals, 300 kilometers, 400 kilometers. And what it brought to highlight, I used to work closely with Dilip and other foresters who were at that time ruling Karnataka. And there was a fear, if a tiger dies, they would go into a panic and, press would criticize them. And I showed with data that this population, well-protected tiger population, whether it is Ranthambore or Nagarhole or Kana, loses 20% of its individuals every year to mortalities. Mortalities could be from going out and getting killed, from starvation, fights, but that does not matter. As long as the prey is up and the production is up, and breeding tigers are not being hunted in core areas, tigers can take a lot of hammering. So every time a tiger dies, one need not panic. As long as you measure the numbers and see that they are not going down. Measure the prey accurately so you know there is enough food. These are the key steps, not worrying and agitated. People used to hide tiger poaching and dead tigers because they were afraid of being virtually court-martialed by newspapers and governments. So with this study, at least in Karnataka, later here, now they accurately report mortalities. So that fear of data is gone. So the study was continued for 30 years across this very large landscape, and it concluded in 2017. And I realized that a lot of the academics who studied large mammals were not trying to engage with the government and the public. Both are needed because it is these guards who are controlling the poaching. Somebody publishing a great paper in Indian Institute of Science or Center for Wildlife Studies doesn't matter. It is effective protection on ground what saves wildlife. So it's like the company is run by government and the public. Wildlife scientist is more like an auditor. He is not doing the job. But his job he should do well. If you have a bad auditor, the company will go down and no. So I engaged quite a lot. And of course, that generation of forests were very much open. Mr. Debroy, who was DG, P.K. Sen, who was director Project Tiger, they were extraordinarily open to collaborations. So we interacted At that time, resources were short. So in addition to monitoring, 28 forest department were given 28 jeeps, all sorts of interventions. And that was I consider the late 90s, early 2000 as a truly golden year when there was really good synergy between NGOs and the forest department. I also knew that scientists couldn't do much. You need social contacts. You needed to influence politicians, religious leaders, courts, police, and that couldn't be done by scientists. So when young people came to me, I made them collect data. I tortured them literally in the field. But many of them, some of them became biologists, but a lot of them went back and became local and quite effective. I was funding them only to run around phone calls of vehicles, but they spent a lot of time doing conservation. They were coffee planters, cable TV operators, journalists, all sorts of people. So one of the things we were able to use this network of conservationists across was to deal with the issue of human-wildlife conflict which had emerged. And we were able to develop that and, act as facilitators, work with the government on one hand and farmers on the other to make sure compensation delivery was prompt, etc. The other more important thing was many of our parks are still landlocked. People are there, they're demanding development, they want roads, highways. So we fought very aggressively to promote voluntary relocation, because there were many NGOs saying these people should live there and all development should be given there. So we worked with the people, convinced them to accept relocation packages. And these were some very good projects in Karnataka in the 90s, late 90s, 2000 in Bhadra, Nagarhole. But then the effort has tapered off in Karnataka because of lack of interest in the present generation of bureaucrats. They have other things more interesting. However, Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra have done a fantastic job, not by few IAS officers, few IFS officers, few good NGOs. They have done an incredible job, particularly in Maharashtra, but more recently in Madhya Pradesh on a bigger scale, to really promote voluntary relocation in a way that's fair and equitable. That's important. It's not about throwing people out. So key to this is the NGO link. I was able to get a journalist, make him Mutana, make him close the newspaper and become a leader of the relocation team. He maintained contact with the beneficiaries. You maintain contact with religious leaders. In the end, we were able to do a relocation in Bhadra, which was turned out to be a tremendous model. When Mr. Jairam Ramesh became environment minister, he said, I want to go and see tigers. I said, please go and see Bhadra relocation. That's more important. He flew in a chopper, saw it, and he really pushed for it later. However, it needs three players, NGOs, forest department, and the public. All need to work together. And this was a spectacular success in Bhadra, and similar success has now been achieved in other places. To me, science has to be used for these kind of things. But if you look at 90% of wildlife scientists, they say they don't talk about relocation or the necessity for it, or how do you separate development from conservation. They ignore these problems. So I'm not saying government alone is to blame. The NGO community is also, conservation NGO community is not standing up and stating the facts that voluntary relocation is a critical need. And it is a win-win solution where people are better off also. And the visionaries behind this project, incidentally, even before I began to promote it, I had just suggested it to Mr. Shamsundar and Mr. Parmeshwarappa, two senior officers in Karnataka, that they should find the land. And they found this land and hung on to it, resisting all political pressure for nearly 20 years. That's why we were able to do it. So then the keeping in touch is important. NGOs have a way of interacting with people which is very different, because the same quality can be maintained, whereas in the government, the quality of interaction depends on who's sitting in that chair, and they keep changing. So with this, in Kudremukh, we brought back Gaur, where there were 500 or so families. So one side of it was dealing with the issue of interspersion and relocation. The other was sometimes big projects do cause harm. And this is Kudramukh iron ore mine. I'm not saying iron ore mining is bad, but this was a very bad location and it was doing tremendous damage. We did studies on the damage to hydrology. Finally, the conservation groups went to the Supreme Court, CEC, and got this largest Asia iron ore mine shut down. So it takes science and then action in all dimensions. And but the role of science is critical because otherwise the actions will be irrational. But in the end, as a scientist, I come back and say, my job as an auditor is to say, is all this working? Because today we are seeing budgets that are 30–40% more than what they were, or 30 times more than what they were. Lots of expenditure, a lot of people posing before videos and claiming they are doing this and that. Government spending a ton of money, is it working? So that monitoring is really details. And this is what we did over this entire landscape for 30 years, was to monitoring critically. For example, there may be about, this is ungulates, this is prey signs, individual tigers. And basically looking at this landscape, you get the real data that from where there were about 70 or 80 animals now 50 years ago, there are truly about 350 or 400, or already those numbers being claimed, I think, are too high, but at least 350 to 400 tigers are there. But the nice thing about this is in Karnataka alone, we have enough room. If we spread the effort rather than focus it where we are, we can triple these numbers. And in India, we can easily have 3 to 4 times more tigers than we have. This is my argument. So I'm coming close to an hour. Of course, we lost a bit. I'll just wrap up in 5 minutes. I'm speeding up a bit. So in a landscape where I desperately looked for tigers as a teenager, never saw one for the first 15 years. Educating school children right around the park, not in urban areas. My daughter Kriti is leading most of this effort. So we are at a stage in Karnataka now and all over India that we have become a fairly affluent country. I don't know whether it's Amrit Kal, but we have certainly progressed enormously thanks to Mr. Narasimha Rao and others who followed in his footsteps. There is certainly economic growth, urbanization. People are moving away from rural to semi-urban and urban areas. And this is providing new tools for conservation. And we are not recognizing it. We are just saying development has only the negative, which is true, it has negatives, but it also has positives of drawing people off the land and into other occupations. US was 80% agriculture 200 years ago. It's now 3% agriculture, rest is in other occupations. We have moved from 20% urban, semi-urban to now nearly 50% semi-urban. So one consequence has been the tremendous interest in nature that you find, which you see, which looks like overuse, which it is. But if we can create more habitats outside these areas, on private lands, like they have in South Africa and other places, the parks are not the only place where you see wildlife. If the economic power of tourism can be channeled to expanding our areas, then we can go even beyond 5% and create more habitat for tigers. So I have made these arguments in much more detail in my book. There is unfortunately not enough room to go into these in a short talk like this. So I have made this room, I have made these points, and I am optimistic. So in a sense, I'm both. I'm saying glass is half empty when I see the bad monitoring, overinflated budgets, bad habitat manipulations. A lot of things are not done right. But I'm saying half full when I see the opportunities that exist. So I do believe there is room for optimism, but it needs a basis of science. And I will wrap up just by giving an overview. Globally, tiger range has shrunk, as I said, to 7%. India has definitely done better than other 10 range countries. And there is no doubt we have done better. But what I am saying is, we could do a lot better. That is the point, not to be satisfied with what we have done. About 500 years ago, perhaps 3 lakh tigers roamed India. This is very crude genetic estimates. Yet we had only 2,000 roughly left in 1970 when some of you joined service and started bringing back the tiger. And despite 50 years of effort, we roughly have 3,000 now, which is a growth rate of less than 1%. So I don't think it's something we should be boasting about. We can say we have done better than others, but we really have to address some of the problems. And I see the big problem came in 2004 with the formation of the Tiger Task Force, the creation of a massive central bureaucracy called the NTCA, too much money being pumped into park budgets, the World Bank style eco-development. Whole set of problems has come. If we can address all these problems and really recognize we have 380,000 square kilometers of forest in India, and even if we protect a small fraction of it, we can have 10,000 tigers. So I've made this case more in my book, and this is more a provocative statement so that you all buy my book and read it. There is a selfish motive to everything in life, but I have argued for a certain approach in that book, and I do hope you will find it interesting, because I would love to send you all copies, but it's too expensive for me to do that. So it's been a real pleasure talking to all of you, and I will shut down the PowerPoint now, or shut down the share, which I will, I think I can.
हो गया सर, कर दिया.
Okay, you did that. Okay, thanks. So I just want to see you all. Okay. All right. So now the floor is yours. I am not hearing anybody.
No, I had put in, I'm Rajendra Banawat, I had put in 2-3 questions in the chat box, so probably I thought you would read and
No, I think it will be harder. I think if I
Okay.
don't know how much time we have, but we can just go over the questions after. But
Can I just say one question, if not the other, so depending on the time? So, because
absolutely.
I had an occasion to work in tourism department for quite some time in Rajasthan. And then there's always a tussle between what is the carrying capacity of a park. Should more tourists come? Should they be allowed to go near the tiger? Because there's always a craze in the tiger park when they visit to go very near it. So according to you, I mean, too many gypsies surrounding a tiger. Does it not make it a slightly a domesticated sort of an animal? I mean, is it not? Is it fair to the tiger to go very close to it? It was. How do you determine the carrying capacity of a park? These are two things which I was coming to my mind.
Yeah, I think there are multiple issues involved in the question. Very important question you raise. Number one, tourism industry, tourists are one constituency which wants that land under forest and tigers rather than under ragi crop or sugarcane. So in some sense, they are with us in protecting the land for the tiger. That must be recognized and used to expand the parks. Now, what is happening in India is because we have not expanded the tiger habitat, we are getting and also because we are increasing densities of tigers through artificial habitat manipulation, like water holes, creating grasslands. We have these high densities. And our tourists, unfortunately, I still go to the forest. I don't see the tiger. I'm not at all disturbed. I watch birds. I listen to other things, anticipating the tiger. That whole thrill is gone. It's become like you're going to a park only to see a tiger. This very tiger-centric training of the tourists, which is done by the tourism industry and the forest department, is the problem. I think we have to wean them away from saying you're going there. If you want to be sure of seeing a tiger, go to a zoo. In the wild, it is chance. Like the PM came to Bandipur. I don't know what people had told him. He didn't see a tiger. And it shouldn't be a problem. I went to forest for 15 years without seeing a tiger. I think it shouldn't be tiger-centric. But I think creating economic force to expand tiger habitat, there are so many marginal farming areas where we can have tiger habitat inside. That is where I'm with the tourism industry. So I don't know. And the second point is, I think we should not habituate tigers that much. I agree with you, because there are a downside to it. One is, everybody, to me, it loses the natural experience. I'm not worried about the tiger. If the tiger wants to go, it will get up and go. Nobody can hold a tiger there. I'm more worried about us losing that quality of being. It's almost like watching a tiger in a zoo. And the bigger worry I have is now, we are seeing these cubs born in these protected areas, which are so used to human presence, but they disperse. When they grow, they disperse and go into human-dominated landscapes and reserve forests and areas, and they have not learned fear of human beings. And then they turn into man-eaters and start preying on humans. We have had many cases. This kind in terms of the dispersing animals being too habituated to people. So I do agree with you that if you have to be upfront, say you may or may not see a tiger or see it from a distance, for both the quality of the experience as well as preventing over-habituations. We had a serious case where an over-habituated tiger like this in Bhadra became a man-eater. It was caught by a misguided biologist and a misguided minister and a misguided administrator and dumped into another area. It had already killed 2 people, and it went on killing more people and livestock. It caused a riot. You had a case in Ranthambore like that, Ustad tiger, which ate forest guards, and people still wanted it to continue to eat more forest guards. So, but we should not create this situation of familiarity. I think it's okay for Africa. We need to maintain a little more distance. That's my personal view. But the tiger is not harmed. It's fine. It will go off if it doesn't want.
So the education of the tourists and the department is very important. We used to say, we had a poster, you said, we have flora, fauna, you have this, and you also have a tiger. So it should be like that, and that's what is needed. But there, unfortunately, the psyche of the tourist is to just see tiger, you can see the face of the people who return, whether they have sighted a tiger or not.
Tiger has a long stock being a symbol of nature. You want to have your daughter's wedding outside Corbett. Why? You can have your daughter's wedding anywhere, right next to a tiger.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think Rajan Mathur sir.
Yes.
Rajan Mathur.
Mr. Karanth, I am Rajan Mathur, a retired forest officer. My question, firstly, I fully agree with you that if we want to conserve tigers, it should be in situ conservation. That's a very important point you have spoken in the beginning. Now, what I want to put before you is that on one hand, we are promoting in situ conservation, and very recently, some predators from outside, they have been imported from Africa. Some cheetahs have been brought in, and they have been introduced in the forest right next to the tiger habitat. So don't you think that we are increasing competition for the tiger?
That's a very different project, but I mean, it's not a question of see, I think our model of tiger recovery is a globe. It's valid across the globe for any species. We protect the habitat first, build up the prey base, and then the tigers naturally increase. That is how we have recovered tigers. Now, in this case, you can bring an animal from outside, but that should be the last step. When you have the kind of space necessary, when you have enough prey for that animal to survive, and the data on cheetah is very, very clear. Cheetah densities in very excellent habitats is 1 cheetah per 100 square kilometers. Cheetah survival rate, this is a study published in Science by Karen Lawrenson, is 5%. 5% of cheetahs reach breeding stage of all cheetahs born in best habitats. In tigers, it's 20%. So it's such a fragile species. Unless you create a habitat of about 15 to 20,000 square kilometers, which has enough wild prey and does not have competing predators, either tiger or leopard, cheetah will be the sufferer, not those animals. They will finish
Yes.
off the cheetah. And we have domestic dogs by the hundreds in this landscape. So I think the project, I don't blame any particular government because this project was started in 2010. So it got more money now, but the idea is from there. So the problem is we don't plan things on a scientific basis. And then once it gets a certain momentum and funding, it goes on. Unfortunately, whoever conceived it then and whoever sustaining it then has put the cart before the horse. We should have created, perhaps around Pokhran, 20,000 square kilometers habitat without tigers and leopards, full of antelope, and perhaps that's when this could perhaps have been done. I don't see it working anywhere else in India.
Sir, sir, may I say something? Sir, something?
Yeah, go ahead. Jigyasa.
Sir, I think though it is connected to cheetah, but as a wildlife expert, what do you want to say about the Kuno project, sir?
Yeah, I was talking about the introduction project of cheetahs into Kuno. I was talking about that. I don't think it will succeed. You can always see them, their natural behavior is to expand, search for new areas. If you're going to tranquilize and bring it back every time it goes out, how are you going to establish a population?
Sir. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Karanth, I have a different kind of question, and that is, you worked outside the government. You were not really a part of the government. And you have, in our view, managed to influence policies and government decisions in a fairly major way. We've all worked with government, but when we are outside it, sometimes we are unable to influence government decision making, even when it's in own interest, it's in public interest, and it's also in political interest. What are the lessons of your own life? How did you manage to influence government policy being outside it? Was it relationship? Of course, one obvious reason must be your own credibility and scholarship and your dedication. But apart from that, what is it? Because many people with the same virtues still fail to influence government decision making and policy. And it's very important that there is a collaboration in areas like this.
Well, I think, I don't think I have had influence the way you perceive me to have. Honestly, I don't think so. I think we did have influence. It's not just me. There were a group of us. Dr. Ranjit Singh was there, in the government, outside, PK Sen, Valmik Thapar. We worked together with a common vision and were able to get some small things done. Really, in terms of policy, in terms, for example, I've been fighting to have a broad-based, deep wildlife science rooted in our wildlife management. I have failed. I have failed more than I have succeeded. My successes are a very few. It is a perception you have that I have had huge influence in policy, and particularly in the last 10 years, I have had zero influence. So I kind of say my piece and then hope somebody picks it up. But if I think the key is having a political person, an administrative person, and an outside government person, all think alike and are able to push through. And these are narrow windows when those things get done. This happened when Indira Gandhi came to power and she had an interest in wildlife. There are snapshots, but we don't have a system in India of putting science or, for example, the way the government is supposed to get inputs into policy. National Tiger Conservation Authority, the Forest Advisory Committee, project. I have served on these committees. Even when I was there, I felt quite helpless because most of the ideas were not even discussed because there's so many things on the plate. And particularly now, at least those days, there in some cases, some people at least with expertise were put on the committee. Now that whole culture has changed in the last 10, 15 years. So where do you get outside inputs? I had hoped when Niti Aayog was set up as an alternative to like a think tank for the instead of a planning, allocating body, I thought that was a window of time when it could have been done. Bring real experts for specific topics and make it would be an arm of the government, but really getting. But I find most of their consultants are chartered accountant companies, Ernst & Young and people like that. So there is no real effort to bring expertise for the most part, as far as I can see. Of course, in economics, etc., they had Panagaria, really top-class people, but it's not how the Niti Aayog is functioning. So I don't have an answer, but I am sure I didn't have as much influence as you think I had.
Well, you're being very modest. The fact that they adopted camera trap method finally, of course, it took a long time, but won't that be a very important area of success?
No, see, I think camera trap was one part, the mechanical part. The modeling and estimation part, which is critical to make it give reliable results, they have resisted. In fact, they don't even share the data. But interestingly, I had a very positive experience in Thailand. Whatever I say should be done for tiger monitoring in India, I was interacting with the Thai government and a Thai university right from 1998. And they have implemented my tiger monitoring methodology, and it's working very well, and we are now publishing there. So I think as a science, I've had more influence just within the scientific sphere, but not so much in changing reality in my own country.
Sai Saab, shall we request Bisa Saab?
Sir, can I have one thing which is coming to my mind, if you permit, sir? Just small.
Just one question, Sisa ji. I would like to ask one question.
Yeah.
See, Karan Saab, आपने कहा कि only 4 to 5% area is under the protected forest, मतलब in the national park sanctuary, etc. And it needs to be increased to at least 7 to 8%, if not to 10%. But in the democratic setup, it's next to impossible. No government is willing to spare any area for the conservation of wildlife.
No, I mean, it's a deep question. So without going much into detail, I'm saying certainly there is area which is already under government control where it can be done. And secondly, for these species, charismatic species like snow leopards, now it is happening in Ladakh. And with tigers, with proper tourism, we can expand into private lands also. I don't think 7%, because we have to look at the overall economy. What is happening is a demographic shift. If you go to remote parts of Western Ghats, remote parts of Uttarakhand, Munshiari and places like that where I went, people are abandoning these areas and going to the plains where there is urban jobs. In Hunsur, a village, women are pumping gas. So we have this shift that's happening. This is what China took advantage of. I think we should take advantage of it, because if you take development to these remote areas, then everything will develop there. I think right now is a moment where you incentivize people to move. I think we can create space, because if you, I also didn't, this was too brief a talk. There are two presumptions underlying my talk. To create space for nature and a human population of 1.5 or whatever, when our India's population will start going into decline. It is started in the south, but overall, I think we'll start the decline then. To do that, we need two things. One, we need to make agriculture absolutely more efficient. All this business of saying we'll do everything organically, and Sri Lanka tanked trying to do that. And shunning biotechnology, shunning gene editing, saying we will grow crops the way your grandfather did. Yeah, sure, but life expectancy was 32 and India's population was 20 crores. So we definitely need to modernize agriculture, not necessarily with the first green revolution model of pumping more water and chemicals. That can't be done. We now need a different approach. Second is energy. I think we are in a situation where clean green energy is actually only nuclear power. We don't have the option of other places, a lot of sunlight, a lot of water to have these other. So my fundamental assumption is the demographic shift, economic growth, and these two approaches is what will change the situation in a very fundamental way. So sorry, that's I've talked more in that book. This was way beyond the scope of this talk. That's briefly my view. I'm very optimistic this can happen.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. It has been a
Sir,
pleasure meeting so many old friends and people who
I
have
am
been
SS
in the
Vissa, retired former Indian Administrative Officer. Sir, on behalf of the All India Services Pensioners Association, as Secretary of the Association, I am thankful to you for this very, very informative and interesting talk, sir. And I think both very, very senior officers of Forest Services, like this Rajadi Saab and this Sai Saab and the wildlife experts, Mandari Saab is there. I think if you read more than 10, 20 books, I myself agree that तब भी हमें इतना ज़्यादा सूचना नहीं मिल सकती थी जितनी आपने इस 1 घंटे में हमें दी है, और जितनी सूचना हम समझ पाए टाइगर और फॉरेस्ट के बारे में उतना कभी नहीं जान सकते यदि आप जैसे व्यक्ति हमें लेक्चर देने के लिए नहीं आते। तो उसके लिए मैं सबसे पहले आपको धन्यवाद के साथ साथ हमारे जिज्ञासा साहब को धन्यवाद देंगे कि आप जैसे व्यक्तित्व को हमारे बीच बुलाया। मैं OTS में इंडियन फॉरेस्ट सर्विसेज जो न्यू एंट्रेंट्स हैं जो देहरादून से आते हैं उनका 3-4 बार कोर्स कोऑर्डिनेटर रहा, और उनके माध्यम से महीना भरते जब रहे तो मुझे बहुत सारी कुछ बातें जानने को मिली, और मैं चाहता हूं कि ऐसी जगह पर आप आकर के उनको कुछ बताएं तो उनके लिए बहुत बहुत बड़ा लाभ होगा सर। सो मैं आपको बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद ज्ञापित करता हूं। उसके साथ साथ मैं गीता मित्तल संस्थान का धन्यवाद ज्ञापित करता हूं और मनीष जी का और खन्ना साहब का धन्यवाद ज्ञापित करता हूं जिन्होंने ये अवसर दिया, जूम पर हमें सबको आपसे मिलाने का अवसर दिया। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर। थैंक यू वेरी मच सर।
Thank you.